The river's savage current drowned all sound as Madeline Lancaster screamed her son's name into the churning waters. Moments before, 6-year-old Thomas had been skipping stones along the bank. Now there was only the furious rush of the spring-swollen Colorado and her own desperate cries echoing through the canyon walls. It was April 1876, in the unforgiving territory of western Colorado, a place where nature's beauty and cruelty existed in perfect harmony. Madeline's journey west with her young son after her husband's death had been meant as a fresh start, not an ending that would shatter what remained of her fragile world. Her throat raw from screaming, Madeline waded deeper into the frigid water, her skirts billowing around her like some grotesque water lily. The current pulled at her legs with a strength that threatened to claim her too, but she no longer cared if it did. What was life worth now, madam? "Stop right there." The command came sharp as a rifle crack. Strong arms caught her waist, pulling her backward toward the shore. Madeline thrashed against her captor, desperate to continue her search even as rational thought told her it was futile. "Let me go, my son. Thomas is out there," she cried, her voice breaking as her feet found solid ground again. "You can't help him by drowning yourself," the man said, his voice gentler now but still firm as iron. He turned her to face him, his hands steady on her shoulders. "The river's too dangerous this time of year." Through tear-blurred vision, Madeline took in the man before her, tall and weathered, with eyes the color of the summer sky above them. His face was bronzed from years under the western sun, and beneath the wide brim of his Stetson, she could see dark hair streaked with hints of silver at the temples. "My boy," she whispered, her strength finally giving way as she collapsed against him. "My Thomas." The stranger held her upright, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "I'm Isaac Sullivan," he said simply. "Let me help you search downstream." For 3 days, Isaac Sullivan rode with Madeline along the river's edge. They traveled miles downstream, searching every eddy, every bank, every shallow where a small body might have washed ashore. Isaac's skills as a tracker proved invaluable, though they ultimately revealed nothing but the river's indifference to human suffering. On the 4th morning, as they stood on a high bluff overlooking a particularly treacherous stretch of rapids, Madeline finally accepted what Isaac had known from the first moment Thomas was gone. "He loved the water," she said softly, watching the sunlight dance on the river's surface. Even when he was just learning to walk, he'd toddle toward any puddle or stream. A bitter laugh escaped her. "I always feared it would be his undoing." Isaac stood beside her, silent as the mountains around them. His presence had become a strange comfort in these days of desperate searching. "I should have watched him more carefully," Madeline continued, the words she'd been repeating internally now spilling out. "We stopped for just a moment. He wanted to skip stones. I turned away for an instant to adjust my horse's saddle." Her voice trailed off. Isaac surprised her then, taking her hand in his. His palm was rough against her skin, but warm and somehow reassuring. "The world takes what it wants, Mrs. Lancaster. No amount of watching would have changed that." "Madeline," she corrected automatically. "Please call me Madeline." He nodded, his eyes never leaving the river below. "Madeline, then." They stood in silence for several moments, the spring breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. It seemed an obscenity that the world could remain so beautiful when her heart was shattered beyond repair. "What will you do now?" Isaac asked, his voice low. Madeline had no answer. Her journey west had led her to the small settlement of Cedar Ridge, where she'd planned to open a small boarding house with the money her husband had left her. But that had been before. Before the river had swallowed her only child and left her hollow. "I don't know," she admitted. There's nothing for me anywhere now. Isaac turned to her then, his expression resolute. Then we'll build a bridge. Madeline stared at him, wondering if grief had affected her hearing. A bridge. Across this part of the river, Isaac nodded. For his memory. So no other mother loses her child to these waters. The unexpected kindness in those words broke something inside her that had been frozen since Thomas disappeared. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks, but for the first time they weren't only tears of grief. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You didn't know Thomas, you don't know me." Isaac's gaze shifted from the river to her face, his eyes reflecting the same pain she carried. "I know loss, Madeline. And I know that sometimes the only way forward is to build something new from what remains." In that moment, as the Colorado continued its relentless journey below them, something shifted between them, not hope exactly, but perhaps the promise that hope might one day be possible again. Over the next few weeks, Madeline found herself staying in Cedar Ridge, renting a small room above the general store while Isaac began making plans for the bridge. She had intended to leave once the search for Thomas concluded, but the promise of the bridge kept her tethered to this place. Isaac Sullivan was well known in Cedar Ridge, respected for his skills as both a rancher and a builder. His property, the Silverhawk Ranch, lay several miles outside town, but he spent most days now in town consulting with the local carpenter and blacksmith about materials for the bridge. "It won't be easy," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house where she stayed. "The river's narrow enough at Thompson's Bend, but the current's strong. We'll need solid foundations and good timber." Madeline found comfort in these practical discussions. They gave her mind something to focus on beyond her grief, which still ambushed her at unexpected moments at the sight of a small boy in the street or hearing childish laughter from the schoolyard. "I have money," she offered, "from selling our home in Pennsylvania." It was meant for the boarding house, but Isaac shook his head. "Keep your money, Madeline. This bridge isn't just for Thomas. The town's needed a crossing there for years. I've spoken to Mayor Griffith, and the town council is willing to provide most of the materials." "But why are you doing this?" she persisted. It was a question she'd asked before, but his earlier answer hadn't fully satisfied her. Isaac was silent for a long moment, his eyes focused on the distant mountains turning purple in the fading light. "I had a brother," he finally said. "Younger than me by 6 years. We were crossing a river much like the Colorado when I was 19. The horse spooked and Samuel was thrown. I couldn't." He stopped, clearing his throat. "I couldn't reach him in time." Madeline's hand found his on the porch railing. "I'm sorry." "It was 20 years ago now," Isaac said. "But not a day passes that I don't think of him. Building this bridge won't bring Thomas back, but maybe it can save someone else's child, someone else's brother." In that moment, Madeline saw Isaac Sullivan clearly for perhaps the first time, not just as the kind stranger who had pulled her from the river, but as a man who carried his own scars, his own regrets. As spring gave way to summer, work on the bridge began in earnest. Madeline found herself drawn to the construction site daily, watching as men from town and nearby ranches volunteered their labor. Isaac supervised everything, his expertise evident in every decision, every calculation. She began bringing food for the workers, bread and cheese, apple pies and jars of lemonade to combat the summer heat. It gave her purpose, a reason to rise each morning and face another day without Thomas. "You don't need to do this," Isaac told her one afternoon as she arrived with a basket of fresh biscuits. "Yes, I do," she replied simply. They both understood she wasn't talking about the food. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Madeline found that the crushing weight of grief began to ease. It never disappeared, she knew it never would, but it became something she could carry without being completely bent beneath it. One evening in late June, Isaac found her sitting alone by the river, a short distance from the construction site. The bridge's foundation pillars were now visible, thrusting defiantly from the water. "May I join you?" he asked, hat in hand. Madeline nodded, making room on the fallen log where she sat. They had grown comfortable in each other's company over these weeks, finding solace in shared silence as much as in conversation. "I've been thinking," Isaac said after a while. "You mentioned wanting to open a boarding house." "That was before," Madeline said softly. "I know. But the old Miller place on Sycamore Street is for sale. It would make a fine boarding house with some work." Madeline looked at him in surprise. "You think I should stay in Cedar Ridge?" Isaac kept his eyes on the river. "I think you should consider it. The town could use a good boarding house." "And?" He hesitated. "I think Thomas would want you to build something too, not just me." The mention of her son's name still caused a sharp pain in her chest, but Isaac's words resonated with something she'd been feeling herself. Cedar Ridge, initially just a stop on her journey west, had somehow become more. The people had embraced her, shared in her grief, offered kindness when she needed it most. "Perhaps you're right," she said finally. Isaac's smile was brief but genuine. "Just think about it." July brought scorching heat that slowed work on the bridge, but didn't stop it. Madeline, meanwhile, found herself visiting the Miller house on Sycamore Street, walking through its empty rooms and envisioning what could be. The house was large, 6 bedrooms upstairs, a spacious kitchen, and a parlor that caught the morning light beautifully. She made an offer before she could talk herself out of it, using half of her savings as a down payment. When she told Isaac, his pleased expression confirmed she'd made the right choice. "It'll be good for the town," he said. "And good for you too, I think." "I think so too," she admitted. "It gives me something to build, as you said." Work began on the boarding house even as construction continued on the bridge. Isaac split his time between both projects, offering advice on repairs needed for the old Miller place and overseeing the increasingly impressive structure taking shape across the river. Madeline found herself working alongside him often, learning things she never imagined she would need to know: how to identify rot in floorboards, the correct mixture for mortar, the best way to strip old wallpaper. The physical labor was exhausting but healing in its way, allowing her to fall into dreamless sleep each night rather than lying awake with memories. One afternoon in early August, as they worked together replacing a broken window in what would become the boarding house's dining room, Madeline found herself studying Isaac's profile as he carefully measured the frame. At 45, he was 15 years her senior, but the years sat well on him. There was a quiet strength to him that she had come to rely on, though she hardly dared admit it to herself. "You're staring, Madeline," he said without looking up from his work. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined when I first came west." Isaac set down his measuring stick and turned to face her. "Different better or different worse?" The question gave her pause. "Different, different," she finally said. "I never imagined losing Thomas. That will always be the worst thing that could have happened." Her voice caught, but she continued. "But I never imagined someone like you either, Isaac. Someone who would understand without trying to fix what can't be fixed." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear that had escaped her simple bun. "We're all broken in some way," he said softly. "The trick is finding the people whose broken pieces fit with yours." The moment hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Then a shout from outside, one of the workers calling for Isaac, broke the spell, and he stepped away, clearing his throat. "I should see what they need," he said, already moving toward the door. Madeline nodded, her heart beating oddly fast. "Of course." After he left, she pressed her palm against her cheek where his fingers had brushed, wondering at the warmth that lingered there. As summer began its slow transition to fall, both projects neared completion. The bridge, solid and impressive, spanned the Colorado where it narrowed at Thompson's Bend. The boarding house, which Madeline had decided to call the Riverside Lodge, was freshly painted and furnished, ready to welcome its first guests. Word had spread about both endeavors. Travelers passing through often commented on the bridge, unusual in its quality for such a small settlement. Several had already inquired about rooms at the boarding house once it opened. The night before the bridge's official opening, the town organized a celebration. Tables were set up in the town square, laden with food contributed by nearly every household. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between buildings, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon music filled the evening air. Madeline, wearing her best dress, a deep blue calico she'd ordered from Denver, found herself the recipient of many kind words and congratulations on her new business venture. She accepted them graciously, though each compliment reminded her of the terrible reason she had remained in Cedar Ridge. She was speaking with the mayor's wife when she felt a presence beside her. Turning, she found Isaac, looking uncharacteristically formal in a clean white shirt and dark vest. "Madeline," he said with a slight bow, "you look lovely this evening." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of the way her pulse quickened at his presence. "You clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Sullivan. Would you care to dance?" he asked, offering his hand. The question surprised her. In all their time working together, they had maintained a careful distance, friendly but proper. Dancing seemed a step across an invisible boundary they had both respected, yet she found herself placing her hand in his. "I would." He led her to the area cleared for dancing, where several other couples already moved to the lively tune. Isaac's hand rested lightly at her waist as they joined the circle dance, his touch respectful but warm through the fabric of her dress. "I haven't danced since before Thomas was born," she admitted as they circled each other. "You dance beautifully," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times. Between dances, they walked together through the celebration, accepting congratulations and well wishes for tomorrow's bridge dedication. To anyone observing, they might have appeared to be a couple, though neither acknowledged this shifting dynamic between them. The music eventually slowed, and the fiddler began a melancholy tune that seemed to catch the evening's bittersweet quality. Without asking, Isaac drew Madeline into his arms for this slower dance, keeping a proper distance but holding her more securely than before. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked quietly. Tomorrow, the bridge dedication. They had discussed having a small ceremony, naming it officially as Thomas's Bridge. The thought brought the familiar ache to Madeline's heart, but now it was accompanied by something else too, a sense of purpose fulfilled. "I think so," she said. "It feels right somehow, a way to make something good come from." She couldn't finish. Isaac's hand tightened slightly on hers. "I understand," and he did. That was what had drawn her to him from the beginning, his understanding of grief, his patience with its unpredictable nature, his acceptance that some wounds never fully heal. "Isaac," she said suddenly, "thank you for everything." In the lantern light, his eyes softened as they met hers. For a breathless moment, Madeline thought he might kiss her. Instead, he simply pulled her a fraction closer as they continued to dance, his cheek nearly touching her hair. No need for thanks between friends, he murmured, friends. The word felt simultaneously true and inadequate for what had grown between them. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect September day. The entire town, it seemed, gathered at the eastern end of the new bridge for the dedication ceremony. Mayor Griffith gave a short speech about progress and community spirit, carefully avoiding direct mention of the tragedy that had inspired the bridge's construction out of respect for Madeline's feelings. When it came time for the official naming, Isaac stepped forward, standing tall beside Madeline. "This bridge," he said, his voice carrying easily over the assembled crowd, "stands as a testament to what we can build together, even from our deepest sorrows. It will serve this community for generations, providing safe passage across waters that have claimed too many lives." He paused, his gaze finding Madeline's. "We name it Thomas's Bridge in memory of Thomas Lancaster, whose short life inspired its creation." A small brass plaque, crafted by the town's blacksmith, was unveiled, bearing Thomas's name and the date of completion. Madeline stepped forward to touch it, her fingers tracing the letters of her son's name. "May no other mother lose a child to this river," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. After the ceremony, people began to disperse, many stopping to shake Isaac's hand or embrace Madeline before heading back to town. Eventually, only the two of them remained, standing in the middle of the bridge, looking down at the river that had brought them together through tragedy. "What will you do now?" Madeline asked, echoing the question Isaac had posed to her months ago by the riverside. "With the bridge finished and my boarding house nearly ready to open," Isaac leaned against the sturdy railing, his profile strong against the backdrop of distant mountains. "I've neglected my ranch these past months. There's plenty waiting for me there." Madeline felt an unexpected pang at the thought of seeing less of him. Their daily collaboration had become a cornerstone of her new life in Cedar Ridge. "You'll be busy with your guests, I imagine," Isaac continued. "The stage from Denver brings new faces every week." "Yes," she agreed. "Though it will be strange not having you underfoot, telling me how to properly hang a door or mix paint." That drew a smile from him. "You never needed much instruction, Madeline. You're a natural builder." They fell silent, watching an eagle soar over the canyon. The completed bridge beneath their feet felt solid, permanent, a fitting memorial for her son, whose brief life had touched so many in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Will you come to dinner?" she asked suddenly. "At the boarding house, once it's open." "Not as a paying guest, of course, but—" She stopped, flustered by her own impulsiveness. Isaac turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I'd like that." Something shifted between them in that moment, a door opening to possibilities neither had been ready to acknowledge until now. The Riverside Lodge officially opened the following week, welcoming its first guests, a family traveling from St. Louis to San Francisco, and two businessmen from Denver looking to invest in local mining operations. Madeline found herself busy from dawn until well after dusk, cooking, cleaning, and ensuring her guests' comfort. Despite her invitation, Isaac didn't appear for dinner that first week, nor the second. She told herself it was to be expected. He had his ranch to manage after all, and the autumn cattle drive was approaching. Still, she found herself watching the door each evening, hoping to see his tall frame fill the doorway. It was nearly October when he finally came. Madeline was in the kitchen, preparing apple dumplings for dessert, when Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman she'd hired to help with housekeeping, announced his arrival. "Mr. Sullivan's in the parlor," she said with a knowing smile that Madeline chose to ignore. Wiping flour from her hands, she went to greet him, suddenly conscious of her plain work dress and hair coming loose from its pins after a long day of labor. Isaac stood by the fireplace, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the formal setting of the boarding house parlor. When he saw her, however, his face relaxed into a smile that made her heart skip. "Madeline," he said by way of greeting, "your boarding house looks to be a success already. I had to step around 3 trunks in the hallway." "The Morrison family arrived this afternoon," she explained. "They're staying until the spring thaw before continuing to Oregon." She gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. Have you eaten? I could bring you something from the kitchen." Isaac shook his head. "I've eaten, thank you. I just—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to see how you were faring." "Very well," she said, taking the seat opposite him. "Busy, which is a blessing." He nodded, understanding the unspoken truth that busy days meant fewer moments to dwell on grief. "And you?" she asked. "How are things at Silverhawk Ranch?" "Preparations for winter keep me occupied," he replied, "but I find myself in town more often than necessary lately." His eyes met hers. "I miss our conversations, Madeline." The simple admission warmed her more than she expected. "As do I," she confessed. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of her boarders moving about upstairs. "I have something for you," Isaac said finally, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small wooden object and held it out to her. Madeline took it, turning it over in her hands. It was a carved horse, small enough to fit in her palm, crafted with remarkable detail and care. "It's beautiful," she said, running her finger along the smooth curve of the animal's back. "Thomas mentioned he liked horses," Isaac explained. "That day by the river before. He didn't need to finish. I thought you might want something to remember him by." Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes. It was true Thomas had been fascinated by horses, constantly begging for rides and asking endless questions about the different breeds. The fact that Isaac had remembered this small detail and had taken the time to create such a thoughtful memento touched her deeply. "When did you make this?" she asked, her voice slightly unsteady. "Over the past few weeks. In the evenings." He looked slightly embarrassed. "I'm not much of a craftsman compared to some, but it's perfect," she interrupted. "Truly perfect. Thank you, Isaac." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed through shared grief and purpose. Before either could speak again, Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway. "Excuse me, Mrs. Lancaster, but young Jimmy Morrison has taken ill upstairs. His mother is asking for some hot water and perhaps some of your willow bark tea." Madeline rose immediately. "Of course. Please excuse me, Isaac." He stood as well, reaching for his hat. "I should be going anyway. It's a long ride back to Silverhawk." At the door he paused. "Perhaps I could call again, Sunday afternoon, if you're not too busy with your boarders." "Sunday would be lovely," she replied, still holding the carved horse carefully in her hand. As autumn deepened, Isaac's Sunday visits became a regular occurrence. Sometimes they would simply sit in the boarding house parlor, talking of everyday matters: the price of grain for winter feed, the latest news from Denver, or small happenings in Cedar Ridge. Other times, when the weather permitted, they would walk together to Thomas's Bridge, watching the river below and sharing memories of those they had lost. Gradually, Madeline found herself sharing more about her life before coming west: her childhood in Philadelphia, her marriage to William Lancaster, a kind but serious banker whose consumption had taken him far too young, leaving her with a 3-year-old son and few prospects. In turn, Isaac spoke of his years building the Silverhawk Ranch from nothing but determination and hard work, of the loneliness of those early days, and of how the memory of his brother had driven him to succeed where their father had failed. As the leaves turned golden and then fell, as the first snow dusted the distant mountains, their friendship deepened into something neither rushed to define. For Madeline, still carrying the raw wound of Thomas's loss, the slow pace felt right respectful of her grief while allowing room for new feelings to take root. It was early December, when Isaac's Sunday visit coincided with a fierce snowstorm. He arrived just as the first heavy flakes began to fall, intending only a brief stay before returning to his ranch. But as the afternoon progressed, the storm intensified until the street outside disappeared behind a curtain of white. "You can't possibly ride back to Silverhawk in this," Madeline insisted, peering out the frosted window at the blizzard conditions. "It would be madness." Isaac stood beside her, frowning at the weather that had trapped him. "I don't wish to impose on your hospitality, Madeline, especially with a full house of paying guests." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "I have one vacant room at the end of the hall. It's small, but it's yours for the night." Seeing his hesitation, she added, "Please, Isaac, I couldn't bear it if something happened to you in this storm." The admission was more revealing than she had intended, but it achieved its purpose. Isaac relented with a nod. "Very well. Thank you." That evening, the dining room of the Riverside Lodge was unusually festive despite, or perhaps because of, the storm raging outside. All the guests gathered around the large oak table, enjoying Madeline's hearty beef stew and fresh baked bread while swapping stories of other memorable storms they had weathered. Isaac, initially uncomfortable as the only non-paying guest at the table, soon relaxed as the conversation flowed. Madeline, watching him from the head of the table, was struck by how naturally he fit into this makeshift family of travelers and locals. His quiet humor drew laughs from the children, while his knowledge of cattle and land prices engaged the men in serious discussion. After dinner, as was becoming tradition at the boarding house, everyone gathered in the parlor. Mrs. Morrison played carols on the small piano, her husband's deep baritone leading the others in song. Even the usually taciturn Mr. Holloway, a permanent resident who had taken the room next to Madeline's, joined in with surprising enthusiasm. Madeline found herself seated beside Isaac on the settee, their shoulders nearly touching as they sang along with the others. In the warm light of the oil lamps, with the Christmas greenery she had hung that morning adorning the mantel, the room felt like a sanctuary against the howling storm outside. When the music ended and the guests began to drift upstairs to their rooms, Isaac remained in the parlor, helping Madeline bank the fire for the night. "Thank you," he said quietly as they worked. "It's been a long time since I've spent an evening like this. Sometimes I forget what it's like to be part of something larger than myself." Madeline understood exactly what he meant. Since losing Thomas, she had felt cut off from the normal flow of life, as though viewing the world through a veil of separation. The boarding house had helped forcing her to engage with others, to provide comfort and hospitality even when her own heart felt empty. But tonight had felt different somehow, fuller, more complete. "It's good to be reminded we're not alone," she said, straightening from the fireplace. Isaac was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "No," he agreed softly, "we're not alone." For a breathless moment, Madeline thought he might reach for her. Instead, he cleared his throat and gestured toward the stairs. "I should let you rest. You work too hard, Madeline." "Says the man who rises before dawn to tend his cattle," she countered with a small smile. They climbed the stairs together, pausing at the top where they would part ways, her room to the left, his to the right. "Good night, Isaac," she said, suddenly shy in the dim hallway. "Good night, Madeline." He hesitated, then added, "Dreams of peace to you." It was what she had once told him she used to say to Thomas each night, dreams of peace. That he remembered and offered it back to her now brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "And to you," she whispered. In her room, as she prepared for bed, Madeline found herself thinking not of the past for once, but of the future. What place might Isaac Sullivan have in it? The question both frightened and exhilarated her. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, effectively stranding Isaac at the boarding house for another night. Rather than chafe at the confinement, he made himself useful, chopping extra firewood for the constantly hungry stoves and helping Madeline prepare meals for the housebound guests. In the afternoon, when cabin fever threatened the children, Isaac organized a storytelling contest in the parlor, offering one of his carved animals as a prize for the most creative tale. Watching him with the children patient and kind, drawing out even the shyest among them, Madeline felt an ache that was both sweet and painful. He would have been a wonderful father. By the third day, the storm had passed, leaving Cedar Ridge buried under nearly 3 feet of snow. The morning dawned clear and blindingly bright, the town transformed into a glittering wonderland. Isaac prepared to leave after breakfast, his horse retrieved from the livery stable where it had been boarded during the storm. As he stood on the boarding house porch, bundled against the cold, Madeline felt an inexplicable reluctance to see him go. "The bridge should be checked," he said, adjusting his saddle bags. "Heavy snow like this can sometimes affect the timbers. I'll ride there first, make sure everything's sound." "Thomas's bridge is strong," Madeline said with certainty. "You built it well." "We built it well," he corrected her. "You were there every step." She smiled, acknowledging the truth in his words. Though she hadn't driven nails or hewn timber, her presence had been constant throughout the construction, her determination helping to fuel the project forward even when difficulties arose. "Be careful riding back to Silverhawk," she said. "The drifts will be deep in places." Isaac nodded, then surprised her by taking her gloved hand in his. "I'll return on Sunday," he promised, "weather permitting." "I'll hold you to that, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, trying to keep her tone light despite the warmth spreading through her at his touch. He mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle, tipped his hat to her once more, and rode away. Madeline stood on the porch long after he disappeared from view, watching the trail of hoofprints he left in the pristine snow. That evening, unable to sleep, Madeline found herself sitting at her small writing desk, a blank piece of paper before her. She had been contemplating writing to her sister in Pennsylvania for weeks, but had hesitated, unsure of how to explain all that had happened since she left the East. Now, dipping her pen in ink, she began, "Dearest Margaret, it has been too long since I've written, for which I must ask your forgiveness. The journey west was not what I expected, bringing both unimaginable sorrow and unexpected grace." She wrote for hours, pouring out everything: the terrible loss of Thomas, the kindness of the people of Cedar Ridge, the building of the bridge, and finally, hesitantly, about Isaac Sullivan and the growing place he held in her heart. "I cannot yet name what exists between us, whether it is merely friendship born of shared grief or something that might grow into more. I only know that when he is near, the weight I carry seems lighter somehow, and I can glimpse a future that holds more than just shadows of the past. Is it disloyal to Thomas's memory to feel this way? Sometimes I think so, but then I remember how full of life my son was, how he embraced each day with joy and curiosity. Perhaps the greatest tribute to his memory is not endless mourning, but finding a way to embrace life again, as he always did." Christmas approached, bringing with it a flurry of activity at the Riverside Lodge. Madeline decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, hung stockings for the children staying there, and planned a special Christmas Eve dinner for all her boarders. Isaac continued his Sunday visits, sometimes bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from his hives, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, once even a small cactus in a painted pot that he said reminded him of her. Beautiful, resilient, and occasionally prickly. The comment had made her laugh, a sound that was becoming less rare as the weeks passed. On the Sunday before Christmas, Isaac arrived with his wagon rather than on horseback, a large fir tree secured in the back. "For your parlor," he explained when she came out to meet him. "Every boarding house should have a proper Christmas tree." Together they set it up in the corner of the parlor, filling the room with the fresh scent of pine. The boarders, delighted by the surprise, joined in decorating it with paper chains, dried berries, and small cloth angels that Mrs. Peterson had sewn. Later, after the others had dispersed to their various activities, Madeline and Isaac sat alone by the tree, cups of hot cider warming their hands. "I have something for you," Isaac said, reaching into his pocket. "An early Christmas gift. I wasn't sure I'd be able to make it back on Christmas Day, with the weather being unpredictable this time of year." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Madeline unwrapped it carefully to find a wooden picture frame, intricately carved with a pattern of flowing water and small flowers along the edges. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the delicate work. "Did you make this?" Isaac nodded. "I thought perhaps you might have a likeness of Thomas you'd want to display. You mentioned once that a photographer had visited your town in Pennsylvania when he was 4. Madeline's throat tightened with emotion. She did indeed have a small daguerreotype of Thomas, taken just months before they left for the West. She had kept it in her trunk until now, finding it too painful to look at daily. But Isaac's thoughtful gift made her reconsider. "I do have a photograph," she said softly. "And now I have the perfect place for it. Thank you, Isaac." Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his weathered cheek. His skin was warm beneath her lips, and she could feel him go very still at her touch. When she drew back, his eyes were dark with an emotion she couldn't quite name. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and touched her face gently, his calloused thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Madeline," he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. The moment was broken by the sound of the front door opening, and the boisterous entrance of the Morrison children, returning from an afternoon of sledding on the hill behind the church. Isaac dropped his hand, and Madeline moved back slightly, her heart racing as though she had run a great distance. "I should check on dinner," she said, rising quickly from her chair. "And I should be heading back before dark," Isaac replied, standing as well. At the door, bundled once more against the winter cold, he paused. "I'll try to come on Christmas Day if the weather holds." "I hope you will," she said. "But if not, this early gift was most thoughtful." He studied her face for a moment, as if memorizing its features, then nodded once before stepping out into the fading afternoon light. Christmas Day dawned clear but bitterly cold. Madeline rose early to stoke the fires throughout the house and begin preparations for the elaborate dinner she had planned. By mid-morning, delicious aromas filled the boarding house, roasting turkey, cinnamon-spiced apples, and fresh bread. The boarders exchanged small gifts after the morning meal: handkerchiefs, whittled toys for the children, jars of preserves, and hand-knitted scarves. Madeline received several tokens of appreciation from her guests, including a lovely shawl from the Morrison family and a set of bone hairpins from quiet Mr. Holloway. Throughout the day, she found herself glancing toward the window, watching for a familiar figure on horseback. But as the short winter day began to fade into dusk, she accepted that Isaac would not be coming. The temperature had dropped further, and even the short ride from Silverhawk would be treacherous in such bitter cold. Dinner was a merry affair despite his absence. The table groaned under the weight of the feast, and everyone ate until they could eat no more. Afterward, there was singing around the piano again and storytelling by the fire. It was nearly 9 o'clock, with the younger children already tucked into bed, when a knock came at the door. Madeline, who had been clearing the last of the dishes from the dining room, hurried to answer it, trying to temper the hope rising in her chest. She opened the door to find Isaac standing there, his face red from cold, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. In his arms he carried a large bundle wrapped in burlap. "Merry Christmas, Madeline," he said, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "I apologize for the late hour." "Nonsense," she said, ushering him in quickly and closing the door against the cold. "We're all still up. Come in by the fire and warm yourself. Are you hungry? There's plenty left from dinner." Isaac allowed himself to be led to the parlor, still clutching his mysterious bundle. The remaining boarders greeted him warmly, making room for him near the fireplace. "I can't stay long," he explained, removing his gloves but keeping his coat on. "The temperature's dropping fast and I need to get back to check on the livestock." He turned to Madeline. "But I wanted to bring your Christmas gift." He set the burlap bundle carefully on the floor and unwrapped it to reveal a rocking chair small, child-sized, beautifully crafted of polished oak with a cushioned seat covered in soft blue fabric. Madeline stared at it, momentarily unable to speak. The other boarders, sensing the significance of the moment, quietly excused themselves, leaving Madeline and Isaac alone in the parlor. "I know Thomas is gone," Isaac said softly when they were alone, "and nothing can bring him back or fill that empty place. But I thought perhaps someday there might be other children in your life, boarders' children who need a special place to sit, or—" he hesitated, "or perhaps children of your own again in time." Madeline knelt beside the small chair, running her hand over its smooth arm. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every joint fitted perfectly, the wood satiny beneath her fingers. "When did you make this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working on it since October," Isaac admitted. "A little each evening." October, just weeks after the bridge was completed, when they were only beginning to acknowledge the growing connection between them. The time and care that had gone into creating this gift overwhelmed her. "It's the most thoughtful present I've ever received," she said, looking up at him with tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Isaac." He knelt beside her, his face level with hers, his expression earnest. "I want you to know that I understand Thomas can never be replaced. I would never presume to try. But I also believe there's room in a heart for new love alongside the old. New love." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither had dared express until now. "I believe that too," Madeline whispered. "I'm beginning to believe it." Isaac's hand found hers where it rested on the arm of the small rocking chair, their fingers interlaced naturally, as if they had been doing so for years rather than for the first time. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "before the temperature drops further." Madeline nodded, though everything in her wanted to ask him to stay. "Be careful on the ride back." They rose together, still holding hands, and walked slowly to the door. In the dim entryway, Isaac turned to her, his expression solemn. "Madeline, he stopped, seeming to struggle for words, then simply bent and kissed her forehead gently. "Merry Christmas," he said instead of whatever he had been about to confess. "Merry Christmas, Isaac," she replied, her heart too full for more elaborate speech. After he left, Madeline returned to the parlor and sat in the regular-sized rocking chair near the fire, gazing at the child-sized one Isaac had made. Its presence spoke of possibilities. She had thought forever closed to her a future that might include not just continued grief for what was lost, but joy in what might still be found. Winter settled fully over Colorado, bringing short days, long nights, and periodic snowstorms that temporarily isolated Cedar Ridge from the outside world. The Riverside Lodge remained full, with travelers often staying longer than planned due to weather conditions, making the winter surprisingly profitable for Madeline's new business. Isaac's visits continued when weather permitted, though January brought several Sundays when the snow was too deep or the wind too fierce for even his determined journeys from Silverhawk Ranch. On those Sundays, Madeline found herself restless and distracted, checking the windows frequently despite knowing he wouldn't come. February brought milder weather and with it, more regular visits. Their time together had taken on a comfortable rhythm: walks to Thomas's Bridge when conditions allowed, quiet conversations by the fire when it was too cold to venture out, occasional meals with the boarders who had come to expect Isaac's Sunday presence at the table. They rarely spoke directly of the growing feelings between them, but each visit, each conversation, each shared glance acknowledged their deepening bond. Madeline, still cautious with her heart, appreciated Isaac's patience, his willingness to let whatever was developing between them unfold at its own pace. It was late February when Isaac arrived one Sunday with news that disrupted their comfortable routine. "I've been asked to help with a bridge project near Durango," he explained as they sat in the parlor after dinner, the other boarders having tactfully left them alone. "The railroad's expanding, and they need someone with experience building over difficult water crossings." "Durango," Madeline repeated. "That's quite a distance." "4 days' ride in good weather," Isaac confirmed. "They're offering good money enough that I could hire extra hands for Silverhawk when I return." "How long would you be gone?" 3 months, possibly 4. Spring through early summer." Madeline absorbed this information, trying to hide her dismay at the thought of such a long separation. "It sounds like an excellent opportunity," she said carefully. Isaac studied her face. "I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to speak with you first." The implication that her opinion mattered so significantly in his decision touched her deeply. "Why?" she asked simply. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze direct. "Because what happens between us matters to me, Madeline. More than a bridge contract, more than additional hands for the ranch." The honesty of his statement demanded equal honesty in return. "I would miss you terribly," she admitted. "These Sunday visits have become essential to me, but I would never ask you to refuse good work, Isaac." "That wouldn't be fair." He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. "There will be other contracts. What I need to know is whether there's a reason for me to stay that goes beyond Sunday visits and friendship." It was the closest either had come to a declaration, to putting into words the unspoken current that had flowed between them for months now. Madeline took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "There is," she said softly. "At least there could be. I care for you, Isaac. More than I thought I could care for anyone after losing Thomas. It frightens me sometimes how much." Isaac's expression softened, relief and tenderness mingling in his gaze. "I've loved you since the day we named the bridge," he confessed. "Maybe even before that. But I knew you needed time, and I was prepared to wait as long as necessary." Love. He had used the word so simply, so directly that it took Madeline's breath away. Not caring for, not fond of, but love. "I don't know if I'm ready to say those words yet," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "But I think I'm getting closer each day." Isaac lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'll wait for the Durango contract." There will be other opportunities, but what's growing between us that's worth more than any amount of money? Madeline felt a weight lift from her heart. Thank you, she said, for understanding, for not rushing me. I've waited 45 years to find you, Madeline Lancaster, Isaac replied with a small smile. I can wait a bit longer for the rest. As February gave way to March, and the first tentative signs of spring began to appear in the valley, Isaac and Madeline's relationship continued its gradual evolution. Their Sunday visits expanded to include occasional weekday evenings, when Isaac's ranch work brought him to town, or Saturday afternoon picnics by the river, when the weather allowed. With the warming temperatures came increased traffic through Cedar Ridge, keeping the Riverside Lodge busy with new faces and travelers resuming journeys postponed by winter weather. Madeline's reputation for excellent meals and comfortable accommodations had spread, bringing more business than she had anticipated for a first-year establishment. One crisp April morning, almost exactly a year after Thomas's tragic accident, Madeline walked alone to the bridge that bore his name. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, the first of the season, to place on the plaque that commemorated her son. The river below was swollen with spring runoff, much as it had been that terrible day. But now, instead of fear, Madeline felt a complex mix of sorrow and gratitude as she watched the rushing water. Sorrow for what had been lost, gratitude for what had been found in the aftermath. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until Isaac's horse was nearly upon her. He dismounted quickly, concern evident in his expression. "Mrs. Peterson told me you'd come here," he said, approaching cautiously. "I wasn't sure if you wanted company or solitude today." Madeline offered a small smile. "I thought I wanted solitude, but now that you're here, I find I prefer your company." Together they placed the wildflowers beneath the plaque, standing in silent remembrance for several moments. Then, to Madeline's surprise, Isaac removed his hat and began to speak directly to the memorial. "Thomas," he said, his voice strong despite the emotion evident in his face, "I never had the privilege of knowing you properly, but I want you to know that your mother is the bravest, strongest person I've ever met. She honors your memory every day by the way she lives her life and cares for others." Tears slipped silently down Madeline's cheeks as Isaac continued. "I promise you that I will spend every day making sure she knows how valued and loved she is, if she'll allow me that honor. And I promise that you will never be forgotten, not by your mother, not by me, and not by this town that came together to build this bridge in your memory." He replaced his hat and turned to Madeline, taking both her hands in his. "I didn't plan to do this today," he said quietly. "It seems presumptuous, perhaps even inappropriate on such an anniversary. But standing here, I realize there's no better place or time." Slowly, with the dignity of a man who had thought long and carefully about his actions, Isaac Sullivan knelt before Madeline on the bridge named for her son. "Madeline Lancaster, this past year has taught me that life can change in an instant for worse, but also for better. Meeting you, even in the midst of tragedy, has been the greatest blessing of my life. I love you. I believe I will love you until my last breath. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Madeline stared down at him, at this good man who had helped her rebuild her life from the shattered pieces grief had left her. The timing of his proposal on this day of all days might have seemed strange to some, but to Madeline it felt right. It acknowledged that Thomas would always be part of her, part of any life she built going forward. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." Isaac rose and gathered her gently in his arms. Their first real kiss was tender, a promise exchanged without words on the bridge that had brought them together. When they finally parted, Isaac kept his arms around her. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I know this day holds difficult memories." "I'm sure," Madeline replied. "Thomas would want me to be happy. He was such a joyful child he would hate to think his memory brought only sadness." Isaac nodded, understanding as always. "When?" he asked simply. "Soon," she decided. "I don't want a long engagement or elaborate arrangements. Just a simple ceremony with those who have become dear to us here." "Next month," Isaac suggested. "That would give us time to prepare Silverhawk for your arrival. The house needs a woman's touch. It's been just me for too long." The thought of leaving the Riverside Lodge gave Madeline momentary pause. She had built something meaningful there, a place of comfort and welcome that had helped heal her own wounded heart, even as it provided for her livelihood. Isaac, observant as always, caught her hesitation. "We don't have to decide everything today," he assured her. "The boarding house is thriving under your care. Perhaps there's a way to maintain your involvement even after we're married." His willingness to consider her needs, to acknowledge the importance of what she had built independently, only confirmed for Madeline that she was making the right decision. "We'll figure it out together," she said, linking her arm through his as they began walking back toward town. That's what matters. News of their engagement spread quickly through Cedar Ridge, met with widespread approval and genuine happiness from the townspeople who had witnessed their relationship develop. Mrs. Peterson immediately offered to increase her hours at the boarding house to give Madeline time for wedding preparations, while Mayor Griffith's wife insisted on hosting a small celebration for the couple the following Saturday. The wedding was set for mid-May, when the spring flowers would be in full bloom and before the summer heat settled over the valley. Reverend Thompson would perform the ceremony in the small white church on Elm Street, followed by a reception at the Riverside Lodge for the entire town. As the day approached, Madeline found herself increasingly at peace with this new chapter in her life. She had written to her sister in Pennsylvania, sharing the news and receiving an enthusiastic reply that included a delicate lace handkerchief to carry on her wedding day, something old from their mother's collection. The night before the wedding, after the last of her boarders had retired, Madeline sat alone in her room, the wooden horse Isaac had carved for Thomas's memory resting in her palm. She spoke softly to it, as she often did when she needed to feel connected to her son. "I'm getting married tomorrow, Thomas, to Mr. Sullivan, Isaac. I think you would have liked him very much. He's kind and patient and strong. He built a bridge for you to keep other children safe from the river that took you from me." She paused, tears gathering but not falling. "I will never stop loving you or missing you, but my heart has somehow found room to love Isaac too. I hope you understand, wherever you are, that this doesn't diminish your place in my heart. It just means that love can grow even from the deepest sorrow." She placed the carving carefully on her bedside table, next to the framed daguerreotype of Thomas that now resided in the frame Isaac had made. Tomorrow she would begin a new life as Mrs. Sullivan, but Thomas would remain part of that life, a precious memory carried forward into her future. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the union. Madeline dressed simply but elegantly in a new dress of deep blue silk, not white, which would have seemed inappropriate for a widow, but a color that brought out the warmth in her eyes and complemented her auburn hair, now styled in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Mrs. Peterson helped with the final touches, including a small bouquet of wildflowers similar to those Madeline had placed at Thomas's memorial. "Something borrowed," the older woman said, pinning a small cameo brooch to Madeline's bodice. "It was my mother's, and I'd be honored if you'd wear it today." "Thank you," Madeline said, embracing the woman who had become both employee and friend over the past months. "For everything." The church was filled with familiar faces when Madeline entered on Mayor Griffith's arm, having asked him to stand in for her late father in the traditional role. Isaac waited at the altar, tall and distinguished in a new black suit, his expression one of reverent joy as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows exchanged with clear voices and steady hands. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled townspeople broke into spontaneous applause, celebrating not just a marriage but the culmination of a journey that had begun in tragedy and transformed into something beautiful and hopeful. The reception at the Riverside Lodge lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, abundant food, and heartfelt toasts to the newlyweds. Even Mr. Holloway, normally so reserved, offered a few words about how Madeline's kindness had made the boarding house a true home for its residents. As the celebration continued around them, Isaac drew Madeline aside for a moment of privacy in the small garden behind the house. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Very," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "Though it feels strange to say that sometimes. To be this happy when there's still such sorrow beneath it." Isaac nodded, understanding as always. "Joy and sorrow aren't opposites, Madeline. They're companions on the same journey. One doesn't negate the other, they define each other, give each other meaning." "When did you become so wise, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, tilting her face up to his. "Around the time I fell in love with you, Mrs. Sullivan," he replied, bending to kiss her softly. The practical matters of combining their lives were addressed in the days following the wedding. After much discussion, they decided that Madeline would maintain ownership of the Riverside Lodge, with Mrs. Peterson taking on management responsibilities, while Madeline divided her time between the boarding house and Silverhawk Ranch. Their new routine quickly established itself weekdays at the ranch, where Madeline threw herself into learning the operations of the cattle business and transforming the bachelor quarters into a proper home, and weekends in town, overseeing the boarding house and maintaining the connections they had both formed in Cedar Ridge. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long, sun-drenched days and the rhythms of ranch life: cattle drives, hay harvesting, and endless maintenance on fences and outbuildings. Madeline discovered unexpected pleasure in these tasks, in the physical labor that left her pleasantly tired at day's end, and in the satisfaction of working alongside her husband to build something lasting. It was during one such evening in late July, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, that Madeline shared news that would once again reshape their future. "Isaac," she said, her hand finding his on the arm of the rocking chair where she sat, "I believe I'm going to have a baby." Isaac went very still, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not just happiness, but a kind of wonder that made him look suddenly younger than his years. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Are you certain?" Madeline nodded. "As certain as one can be at this stage." "It won't arrive until winter February, I think." Isaac knelt before her chair, taking both her hands in his. Is this something you want, Madeline? After Thomas, I would understand if—" "Yes," she interrupted gently. "I won't pretend I'm not frightened, not of having another child, but of loving so deeply again, knowing how completely it can be taken away. But yes, Isaac, I want this baby, our baby." The joy that illuminated his face was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "I love you, Madeline Sullivan, and I will love this child with everything I am." They sat together as darkness fell, talking quietly about the future practical matters like preparing a nursery at both the ranch and the boarding house, and deeper considerations about how to honor Thomas's memory while welcoming this new life. The child will know about their brother, Isaac promised, about how brave and bright he was, and how his memory inspired a bridge that serves the community to this day. And about how that bridge brought us together, Madeline added. How sometimes the most unexpected blessings can emerge from the deepest sorrows. As her pregnancy progressed through the fall months, Madeline found herself increasingly drawn to Thomas's bridge. She would stand there often, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other touching the plaque that bore her first son's name. "Your little brother or sister is growing strong," she would tell the memorial, as if Thomas could somehow hear her. "I think you would have been a wonderful big brother." It was during one such visit in early November, with the first snowflakes of the season beginning to fall around her, that Madeline felt the baby move for the first time, a definitive flutter beneath her ribs that brought both tears and laughter. Isaac found her there, having come looking when she didn't return to the boarding house at the expected time. He recognized immediately from her expression that something significant had happened. "The baby moved," she told him, taking his hand and placing it on the spot where she had felt the movement. "Right here, as I was talking to Thomas." Though the baby remained still under Isaac's touch, his face reflected the wonder of the moment. "Perhaps Thomas was answering in his way," he suggested gently. The thought brought fresh tears to Madeline's eyes, but they were healing tears, acknowledgement that life continued its cycle of renewal even after devastating loss. Winter settled over Colorado once more, bringing with it the first anniversary of Isaac and Madeline's deepening relationship. Christmas at Silverhawk Ranch was a festive affair, with the house decorated more elaborately than Isaac had ever bothered with during his bachelor years. The small rocking chair he had made the previous Christmas now sat in the newly prepared nursery, alongside a handcrafted crib and other furniture Isaac had spent months creating for their child. A painting of Thomas, commissioned from a traveling artist based on the daguerreotype, hung on the wall, ensuring that the brother this child would never meet would nevertheless be a presence in their lives. February arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow, making travel between the ranch and town increasingly difficult. At Isaac's insistence, Madeline remained at the boarding house for the final weeks of her pregnancy, allowing her to be closer to the doctor in Cedar Ridge while Isaac rode back and forth as weather permitted. It was during one of the worst blizzards of the season, with Isaac stranded at the ranch by impassable roads, that Madeline went into labor. Mrs. Peterson sent the teenage son of one of the boarders to fetch Dr. Mills, while she herself prepared the birthing room with practiced efficiency, having assisted at numerous births in her younger years. The labor progressed quickly for a first-time birth, as Madeline and Mrs. Peterson silently acknowledged Thomas's birth had been, though neither spoke of it. By the time the doctor arrived, fighting his way through snowdrifts nearly as tall as himself, Madeline was already in the final stages. "You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Sullivan," Dr. Mills assured her, quickly washing his hands and assessing the situation. "The baby will be here very soon." Madeline, exhausted but determined, thought fleetingly of Isaac, wishing he could be present for this moment they had both anticipated with such mixed emotions. But there was no time for regrets as another contraction gripped her, stronger than before. "I can see the head," Dr. Mills announced. One more good push should do it. Gathering her remaining strength, Madeline bore down with all her might, feeling the momentous shift as her child entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A girl," the doctor declared, quickly cleaning the infant's airways and wrapping her in a warm blanket. A beautiful, healthy girl. When the tiny bundle was placed in Madeline's arms, she gazed down at her daughter with wonder. The baby had a shock of dark hair like Isaac's, but her eyes, when they fluttered open briefly, were deep green like Madeline's own. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tracing the perfect bow of the baby's lips with a gentle finger. "We've been waiting for you, Mrs. Peterson," wiping tears from her eyes, asked softly. "Have you and Mr. Sullivan chosen a name?" Madeline nodded, not taking her eyes from her daughter's face. "Hope," she said. "Hope Thomas Sullivan." The middle name had been Isaac's suggestion, a way to honor the brother this child would never meet, while giving her an identity uniquely her own. Madeline had agreed immediately, feeling it was the perfect tribute to the son she had lost, and the bridge that had ultimately led to this new life in her arms. It was 3 days before the roads cleared enough for Isaac to reach Cedar Ridge, 3 days of increasing anxiety as he imagined all that might have gone wrong in his absence. When he finally burst through the door of the Riverside Lodge, snow-covered and wild-eyed with worry, Mrs. Peterson merely smiled and pointed him toward Madeline's room. He paused in the doorway, his breath catching at the sight of his wife propped up in bed, their daughter nursing contentedly at her breast. Madeline looked up, her face lighting with joy at the sight of him. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Isaac approached the bed as if in a dream, carefully sitting on its edge and peering down at the tiny face partially hidden against Madeline's body. "She's perfect," he whispered, reaching out to stroke the baby's cheek with one finger. "Just like her mother. Hope Thomas Sullivan," Madeline told him, "exactly as we planned." Isaac's eyes filled with tears as he leaned forward to kiss Madeline's forehead. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for this gift, for everything." As spring returned to Colorado, bringing with it the first anniversary of Isaac and Madeline's wedding, life at both Silverhawk Ranch and the Riverside Lodge had settled into new routines centered around little Hope. The baby thrived, growing stronger each day, her presence bringing joy not just to her parents but to everyone who knew them. On a particularly beautiful May afternoon, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the mountains still snow-capped in the distance, the Sullivan family made a special journey to Thomas's Bridge. Hope, now 3 months old, was securely bundled against Isaac's chest as he and Madeline walked side by side to the center of the span. They stood together, looking down at the river flowing peacefully below, much calmer now than during the spring floods that had taken Thomas 2 years earlier. "Thomas," Madeline said quietly, addressing the memorial plaque as she often did, "we've brought your sister to meet you properly. Her name is Hope, and though she'll never know you in person, she'll grow up knowing all about her brave big brother and the bridge that bears his name." Isaac shifted the baby slightly in his arms so that her curious gaze could take in their surroundings. "This bridge has become more than just a crossing," he continued, picking up where Madeline had left off. "It's a symbol of how loss can lead to creation, how endings can become beginnings." Madeline leaned against her husband's side, one hand resting lightly on her daughter's back while the other traced the letters of her son's name on the plaque. "I used to think that happiness and sorrow couldn't coexist," she said softly. "That one would always overcome the other. But now I understand they're woven together in the fabric of a life fully lived. Thomas taught me how to love without reservation. His loss taught me the depth of grief. And you, Isaac, you taught me that the heart can heal without forgetting, can make room for new love without diminishing what came before." Isaac's free arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her closer. "And Hope is teaching us both that life continues its cycle, that joy can be born even from the deepest sadness." They stood in silence for several moments, a family both fractured and whole, bound together by love that had emerged from tragedy and grown stronger through shared grief and healing. As they turned to leave, Madeline cast one last glance at the river below, the same waters that had taken her son, but had ultimately led her to Isaac, to hope, to this new life built on the foundation of what remained. "Thank you," she whispered, not certain whether she was addressing Thomas, Isaac, the bridge itself, or simply the mysterious workings of a life she had once thought shattered beyond repair, but now recognized as beautifully, imperfectly whole. Isaac's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with practiced familiarity. Together, with hope secure between them, they walked back toward Cedar Ridge, toward home, toward the future that awaited them, built with love from what remained.